The city of Grenoble in France sits at the gateway to the Alps and today hosts the opening day of the Critérium du Dauphiné, which habitually gives us a first indication as to who is ready for the Tour de France battle in July. This year's week-long race, the Critérium du Dauphiné, is shaping up to be a pre-Tour de France showdown. It will be the final race for the top three favourites of the Tour de France this year. 2011 Tour winner Cadel Evans will be testing himself for his title defence come July. 2011 Critérium du Dauphiné winner Bradley Wiggins hopes to keep his early season momentum going as he dreams of becoming Great Britain's first ever Tour de France winner. Last year's second-place finisher at the Tour de France, Andy Schleck, is also on a mission to rise to the top step of the podium in Paris. This week, they will all do battle and gauge each other's form. It all begins with a 3.5-mile prologue time trial. The 64th edition of the Critérium du Dauphiné is next. Since medieval times, Grenoble has been the capital of the Dauphiné region. Today, the epic cycle presented by Michelob Ultra hosts the opening day of the Critérium du Dauphiné with a 3.5-mile individual prologue time trial. Hello, everybody. I'm Paul Schoen. Alongside me is Bob Roll. And the Critérium du Dauphiné, habitually in the past, Bob, has always been about an indication of the Tour de France, who is on form, who is not. And it goes over many of the same roads as the Tour de France will in July.
And for the first time this season, the top three Tour de France contenders will face off: Brad Wiggins, Cadel Evans, the defending Tour champion, and Andy Schleck from Luxembourg. Any rider here who dreams of Tour de France success needs to show well in the Dauphiné. It's a building block of fitness, but maybe more critically, a boost to the morale for any of our Tour de France contenders.
Bob, what I've always liked about the Critérium du Dauphiné is like a little hors d'oeuvre, a pre-taste of what the Tour de France is going to be about. Last year, though, Bradley Wiggins came to this race, a slimmed-down Bradley Wiggins. It was here, all of a sudden, he became a Tour de France hopeful.
Great time trialist. He slimmed down, like you said, to be competitive in the mountains, and he was able to win the Dauphiné this year. He's in the middle of an all-star career-defining season, already twice a winner in stage races at Paris-Nice and the Tour of Romandie.
And the Tour de France podium from last year, Cadel Evans and Andy Schleck, they've got to do something special this week.
Cadel Evans not as strong as last year, but starting to show well. Andy Schleck, though, the mystery man of the peloton this year, hasn't had anything to write home about so far in this year's racing season. Needs to do something in the Dauphiné.
I should think there'll be a very big question mark in the book written by Johan Brunel about how to win the Tour de France over the shoulders of Andy Schleck. But he can prove himself this week. He has to prove himself this week, Bob, but he's probably not going to prove himself in the opening individual time trial and flat.
Well, that's been the Achilles heel for Andy Schleck throughout his career, the individual race against the clock, the race of truth. Our prologue today has a couple of very tricky 180-degree U-turns. Those will be difficult to negotiate. 3 right-hand bends. It's only 3.5 miles long. Dead flat, like you said, and 2 U-turns. Very technical race. Quick, violent, but it will give us a little window into who's competitive for the week's racing.
Well, before we go to the live action, let's have a look at what happened earlier today. This man, the defending champion from the Tour de France, Cadel Evans, deciding with his team management, Bob, to start early.
Second in last year's Dauphiné in the overall standings, Cadel Evans put in the early rotation by his team manager. Thunder showers and rain predicted for later on in the day. Cadel Evans going early and going quite quickly.
Challenging the time there of the Ukrainian rider Andrei Drivko, a former time trial champion of that country. However, for Cadel Evans, only 4 seconds off the mark, and finishing 4th at this point. A good indicator that he's back on track for the Critérium du Dauphiné. Starting 6 minutes after Cadel Evans, another Australian, Luke Durbridge, World Under-23 time trial champion, champion of Australia in the individual discipline as well. He really crushed it, Bob, out on the course.
Durbo, the Turbo, he's called because of his crazy fast leg speed from track racing. Scintillating time, youngest ever under-23 time trial world champion, track specialist, and also very technically gifted, going around those corners quickly.
Well, look at the time of Luke Durbridge when he comes up to the finishing line here. You could almost say that he's an Australian Australian Taylor Phinney. He's got the same pedigree, the same speed, and when he stopped the clock, he had the new best fastest time, 6:38, but the average speed, 51.5 kilometers an hour. That's setting the bar very, very high indeed. Another man who started early on, trying to take advantage of the dry weather conditions, of course, the world time trial champion, Tony Martin, waiting to get himself into the starting house.
Tony Martin recently successful in the Tour of Belgium after a dominating performance in this discipline, the time trial. Tony Martin, everything, current world champion in the time trial discipline.
Well, he was challenging the time of Luke Durbridge. He faltered a little bit down towards the end, but still stopped the clock with the fourth best time at that moment. So the current standings, Luke Durbridge ahead of Andre Grivko and Carlos Barredo in third place. Now, live action here as George Hincapie concentrates on his final preparation for the Tour de France. Hincapie, we hope this year will be lining up, Bob, for his 17th participation, an outright record. What an amazing American ambassador this man has been.
George Hincapie's already done 16 Tours de France to equal the record of Joop Zoetemelk, set many, many years ago. In the infancy of professional cycling, Big George is scheduled. He's on the cusp of racing his 17th Tour de France a little bit later on the summer. The Tour starts June 30th, but George is using this race, the Dauphiné, to get ready for that rendezvous with destiny and history in the Tour de France later this summer.
Well, let's hope that number 13 is not unlucky for some, and that would be George Hincapie a little bit further up. But this guy has actually put in a very, very good performance out on the course. He's a great climber, Thiago Machado from Team Radio Shack Nissan.
Rare amongst fast climbers, Machado can also do a very good time trial when he has some good form. Coming to the line now, challenging the time of Durbridge. He's going to go outside of that, but a solid ride by Radio Shack Nissan Trek rider Thiago Machado. Just finished a Tour of California and carrying some good fitness into the Dauphiné.
Yes, everybody now thinking about July, everybody thinking about the Tour de France looming on the horizon, just like the Alps will in the last part of this race, because we're going to see some magical mountain climbing as we stop the clock there. 36th time for Machado. I don't think he'd be too disappointed with that, but Team Radio Shack Nissan, Bob, they've got to wonder what is going to happen with Andy Schleck, the defending champion of the second place finish in the Tour de France last year. Had an unbelievably bad season so far.
Radio Shack still looking for results. George Hincapie's got a lot of results in his career, including a win in the Prologue of the Dauphiné way back in 2005. He carried that through to the Tour de France when he won a big stage to the Plata Day in that stage of the Tour de France.
Yeah, he's a very good individual time trialist. Remember George Hincapie missing by fractions of a second to winning the Prologue of the Tour de France as well. The style is good. It amazes me, Bob, that this man is still keen to race at this level of the sport.
On the cusp to set what would be a monumental record in cycling, 17 Tours de France. He's tied with Joop Zoetemelk for the most ever at 16, and looking forward a little bit later this summer, he's on schedule to do the Tour de France for the 17th time.
Now, this is one of the 180-degree turns, Bob, and as you can see, in fact, there's a few spots of rain starting to appear now. That's going to make it very, very tricky, especially at that point out on the course.
George Hincapie negotiating that corner fairly well. You can see how slow the riders have to go. Leg speed critical in this prologue because you have to accelerate back up to top speed as quickly as you can. And I'm sure Luke Durbridge saw this course and thought, this is a chance for me with his track leg speed. He was able to accelerate out of those corners like a rocket ship, and Luke Durbridge is the current leader.
Yeah, Durbridge has the fastest time so far. That's 6 minutes and 38 seconds. But later on in the afternoon, Bob, we're going to see the big names coming out to pay. The last man to start, of course, is going to be Bradley Wiggins. Andy Schleck, question mark. Is the form going to be there? His Achilles heel has always been the individual time trial. This man, though, is trying to home tune his form for the Tour de France this year. George Hincapie hails from Greenville, South Carolina. Rode an exceptionally good Amgen Tour of California. Now he's back in France. Ooh, a little bit tricky. These are a bit dodgy, these corners. There's only 3 corners, Bob, on this individual time trial course, but they're all dangerous.
Well, it wouldn't be surprising if the rain hadn't started to affect some of these riders now. Getting a little bit slippery. Sometimes when the rain starts to fall, those are the most dangerous moments because the oil comes up from the road. If it rains heavily, well, then it clears the road surface a little bit. But the initial drops of rain make the roads surface incredibly treacherous.
Especially in these downtown individual time trials, and it's these roads like this that it seems to be that little bit of rain when it first comes. It seems to lift the oil to the surface, making it very slippery indeed. Fortunately for these guys, there are only 3 corners, but amazingly, Bob, they've managed to find 2 of them 180-degree turns.
The ability to corner quickly, critical to success in professional cycling. U-turns make it a little bit more dangerous, but what's most compelling about this stage right now is the rain starting to fall. A technical course made that much more treacherous.
Well, obviously means that Cadel Evans made the right decision, Bob, to go out early. This part of France, Grenoble, nestled right in the middle of the gateway to the Alps. It's always susceptible to late afternoon storm clouds.
Grenoble, called the drainage point of the Alps, we're right in the middle of the mountains. This course, however, flat. George Hincapie on the Avenue to the Olympics. 1968 Winter Games were held right here in Grenoble, France. And George Hincapie just over 2 kilometers to go, 1.2 miles before his finish to start this year's Dauphiné.
Yeah, 2 kilometers to go there. You can see he will swing next into the Avenue Jean Perrault before finally finishing in the Boulevard Clemenceau. Not too far away from the finish line, Martin Gelinghi from Team Rabobank is in the starting house. Bob, 3.5 miles. It doesn't sound like very much, but it's a long day of Prologue time trial for a bike rider.
Well, it's only 3.5 miles, but like you said, it is a very long day for the bike racers. Early morning, you want to take a look at the course. Any tricky corners, there's 5 of them out on this course, 3 right-hand bends and 2 U-turns. But look at Martin Gelinghi. He might have seen those corners and gotten a little bit nervous, trying to keep himself warmed up in the start house of the Prologue.
Well, he rolls down the gap, finished 3rd in Paris-Roubaix last year, and it's a big, explosive effort here. You do have to have a very important warm-up. You've almost, Bob, got to have the engine red hot and ready to go, because you're up to full speed very quickly.
Well, you want to do your recon of the course early in the morning, then have a meal, maybe rest for a little bit, but then you want to get on the turbo trainer out in front of the team bus and do a specific custom-tailored warm-up for an event like this, so short, so violent. It's a pure 100% sprint effort right from the beginning up to speed, and also you have to negotiate the tricky corners out on today's race course. And now it looks like the rain becoming more of a factor as we get into the deeper starters in the Prologue.
Well, the big question mark is what's Bradley Wiggins going to do? He starts at the end. He's a defending champion of the Critérium du Dauphiné, and he will want to put in a very fine start to his race here. The best time still in the finishing house is Luke Durbridge, the Australian, who finished with a time of 6 minutes and 38 seconds, Bob. 51.5 kilometers now, 32 miles an hour on a downtown course. Back with Hincapie.
Big George Hincapie closing in the last kilometer of his race. Just one more corner, he'll see the finish line, try to keep it up to speed as quickly as he can, and then get to the finish line.
Well, he's looking at the time of Durbridge. This is not a great time here. In fact, that's the wrong clock there, because this is a good time by George Hincapie. Look at this. This is not bad. He's got a sweeping right-hand bend into the Boulevard Clemenceau. Hincapie knows how to put it on the line, doesn't he, Bob?
He is a great time trialist, solid climber, Paris-Roubaix specialist. Big George Hincapie now back up to speed, sprinting down this final straightaway. This is a good Prologue run for George Hincapie.
This is going to be a very good time by George Hincapie. Yes, it may well not be as explosive as he was when he turned professional at 20 years of age, but now George Hincapie knows how to dose his effort over a time trial like this.
Closing in on the top 20, just outside of that, he's going to lose about 15 seconds to Durbridge, but not a bad ride by George Hincapie.
So with Luke Durbridge still at the top of the leaderboard, the big names are still to come here at the Criterium du Dauphiné here this afternoon. Yes, Cadel Evans has been and gone, but we're still waiting to see what's going to happen with Andy Schleck and, of course, defending champion Bradley Wiggins. We'll take a break. Anyway, Bob, there's a lot of boys now will be wondering what they're going to do. We're looking here at David Arroyo, 2nd overall in the Giro d'Italia, a little gingerly going around this final bend.
Really going slowly around that last corner, not wanting to fall off the rein. This is a terrible time for David Arroyo. He's not a time trialing specialist, but you expect to do a little bit better than, he'll probably be almost a minute slower than Luke Durbridge.
Amazing to think that in just 3.5 miles you can actually lose a minute to a man on a bicycle. Well, that's about what this is going to be lost by David Arroyo here, but his thoughts a little bit further down the road. He's hoping to be one of the leaders of Team Movistar going on to the Tour de France, but that won't be in the individual time trial.
Interesting story. Movistar has 2 riders. J.J. Kober, winner of last year's Vuelta, who's here in the Dauphiné. And a little bit later in the year, it will be Alejandro Valverde, off 2 years of suspension, coming back to race again in the Tour de France for the Spanish Movistar squad.
Well, last year, Bob, we talked a little bit about the renaissance of French cycling when here is one of the riders on the way up. Arthur Vichot, in fact, is the nephew of Frédéric Vichot, who raced in our days. Frédéric Vichot renowned as being one of the fastest men in the world going downhill during his era of cycling.
Most certainly raced with Frédéric Vichot, the uncle of this man, Arthur Vichot. If you want to see your life pass in front of your eyes, just try to follow Frédéric Vichot on any mountain descent.
That's a dodgy corner, this, Bob. I don't know how they managed to find a dodgy corner right in the middle of downtown Grenoble. Back with Popovic here.
Jaroslav Popovic, former white jersey winner or best young rider in the Tour de France in his career. That was a few years ago. One of the stalwarts of Johan Brunel's programs throughout the years, teammates with Lance Armstrong when he won the Tour de France. Popo is his nickname. He's from the Ukraine, very fast, steady professional, hasn't had a result in a long time. He hasn't won a professional bike race since way back in 2007.
Well, I'll tell you one thing, Radio Shack Nissan have been looking for some results. Unfortunately for them, they've just taken the overall lead in the Tour of Luxembourg, which, if you bear in mind, this team was formed for the amalgamation of Leopard Trek last year and Radio Shack from last year to bring it all together. I think finally Johan Brunel has got something to smile about.
Well, Luxembourg could be called the home race for Radio Shack Nissan Trek, and it was the rider Jakob Fuglsang from Denmark and one of the big stars on this squad, Radio Shack, that was able to win the Tour of Luxembourg today, and that's a good result. But the pressure is still on Andy Schleck to deliver something here in the Dauphiné. I got to talk to Johan Brunel earlier in the day, and he said we're looking for a stage win in the mountains from Andy to give us an indication that he's ready for this summer's Tour de France.
Yeah, Bob, another thing about the Critérium du Dauphiné, a lot of the team managers are deciding which is the final place in their Tour de France squads. You've got to ride well here too. For some guys, it's a question of there's only one place left in the team for the Tour de France. There's a lot of pressure during this race.
That's a very good point you bring up. For the Tour contenders, it's a chance to show their form. It's a chance to hone their fitness for the Tour de France. But for a lot of riders, it's a chance for them to show something and actually make a place for themselves on their Tour de France rosters for the big teams in the world. Never an easy thing to do and always a great honor.
23 years of age, Arthur Vichot. He won 2 races last year, the Boucle de Sud Ardèche and the Tour de Doubs. He's done nothing so far this season, but again, it's nice to see that French cycling is starting to produce a lot of young guys, and the winner of the white jersey in the Tour de France last year was from France, an indication that the French are coming back to the top of the sport that for a long time they regarded as their own.
That's Pierre Rolland, you mentioned, from the Europcar French squad, who won the white jersey and also the most prestigious stage in last year's Tour de France if you're a climber, up to Alpe d'Huez. FDJ, another strong French team. Arthur Vichot looks to have the form and fitness of a climber, and he'll have to depend on that in the last 3 days of this race. Big mountains to come in the Dauphiné.
Big test spot for everybody, I have to say, because not only have we got 3 days of massive alpine climbing at the end of the Dauphiné this week, but we've also got a very long individual time trial, over 50 kilometers the individual time trial. Now that is going to pit Cadel Evans against Bradley Wiggins, and again the question mark we're all asking ourselves, Andy Schleck, because there's a lot of time trialing in the Tour de France this year.
Over 100 kilometers of time trials, or 60 plus miles of time trialing in this summer's Tour de France. Andy Schleck maybe not capable of winning this year's Tour because of the number of miles against the clock, and that's not his specialty.
Well, as we look at Arthur Vichot coming up to the line here, he also has lost himself around about 45 seconds. He'll stop the clock in 89th place. We'll take a short break. Looking down here at Andrei Kashekin as we go quickly to Jaroslav Popovic. He's a great individual time trial. It amazes me to think, Bob, that this guy, he's a solid man to have on a team, but you know, he hasn't won a race since 2007.
Not a fantastic ride for Popovic. He's been in the pink jersey in the Giro d'Italia in his career in the past. He's done the Tour de France a number of times, including helping Lance Armstrong win the Tour in his career, but not a great prologue for Jaroslav Popovic. Still looking for form and still looking for a race win. It's been a long time.
As we look down here at Andrei Kashekin, Bob, it's a very crisp atmosphere at the dinner table at Team Astana, because Alexander Vinokourov and Andrei Kashekin raced for the same Astana team back in 2007 when Alexander Vinokourov was disqualified for doping. The team was asked to remove themselves from the Tour de France. Poor Andrei Kashekin was 8th overall at the time.
Well, he was found a few weeks later in Turkey on vacation by WADA officials, the World Anti-Doping Authority. They administered an out-of-competition test, and Kashekin was also positive for drugs. He subsequently did 2 years out of the sport, came back on the Italian Lamprey squad, and now finds himself back on Astana and at the dinner with Alexander Vinokourov every night. Before his ban, however, this was a man on the rise, 3rd in the Tour of Spain with a stage win there, also a stage win in a prestigious stage race called Pyrenees. But since his ban for doping, it's been a long, hard road for Andrei Kashekin. Not any results to report home about.
Well, I would say probably not a lot for these two to talk about, except the upcoming probably retirement of Alexander Vinokourov, who decided to add an extra year onto his career after that incredibly dramatic crash last year in the Tour de France.
Crashed out of the Tour, Vinokourov did, with a broken femur up there in the hip joint. I've broken my femur before. I can tell you it's one of the most painful experiences you can imagine.
So as we leave Kashekin, we go a little bit further down. This is Simon Geschke of the Argus Shimano squad. Not a renowned individual time trialist, but I tell you what, his dad was a very good track rider in these German days of the sport.
Stage winner in Criterium International last year. 1T4I was the team of this to start the season. Argos was added as their principal sponsor, but Shimano was still one of the major players in this team's success. They've had a lot of race wins the last couple of years, especially because they have some great sprinters on the team. Marcel Kittel is one of the fastest men in the world, and Simon Geschke, pretty fast himself. This course might favor a sprinter because of all the technical corners, and you have to sprint back up to speed 5 times out on the race course in only 3.5 miles, including 2 very tricky U-turns at the end of each long straightaway. Looks like it's drying up a little bit, so no raindrops on the television camera there at the moment. So maybe the fortunes of Bradley Wiggins, who starts last, starting later in the day, will change with the weather.
Well, I'm just having a look at these weather conditions here, Bob. You can see I think it's still a little bit damp here. We're looking back at Andrei Kashekin. You mentioned the fact that this could be a course suited for the sprinters. There are not too many sprinters in this bike race this year anyway, because there are not that many courses for the sprinters. This is really a preparation for the climbers, I would say, the Dauphiné this year.
Almost definitely. Only maybe one sprint stage, stage number 3 out on the race course before the long individual time trial to come in the Dauphiné later in the week. Very narrow roads here, and those narrow roads lead directly into very treacherous corners. Kashekin barely getting around that one.
Well, you know, it's all about seconds in a prologue of 3.5 miles in length, Bob, and just touching the brakes in a corner like that, you could lose 3 or 4 seconds and drop from 1st place to 5th place at the end of the day. That's why these riders will take the risk. And it is very strange. It's actually quite sketchy. There's certain parts of the course seem to be wet. Some parts are dry.
Yeah, that makes your tactics very important for success. You have to know when to slow down and know when you can go reefing through the corners without worry of crashing because of a slick spot in the corner because it's wet. And Andrei Kashekin does not look to be setting a very fast pace. He's a solid time trial in years past. It's been a long time since he did a good one, but on a short one, he's never been a specialist in this type of discipline. A short 3.5 mile time trial against the clock.
Well, a chance here to take a study at the specialized time trial bike that he's using there, Bob. You can see from this front angle here, you can see how narrow the tubes are. All of that is done to make the machine as aerodynamic as possible for the time trial.
You want your bike to disappear in the wind, no draft. You are out there by yourself against the clock, trying to go just as quickly as you can. And like you mentioned just before, a couple of seconds in each corner. You add that up at the end of 5 corners and 2 U-turns like we have today, and you have a loss of a lot of time.
Well, as he swings around that corner, it's around about 300 meters to the go. And you always think when a guy comes around that corner, wow, this is a really good time. But that 300 meters is probably going to take these guys about 15 seconds. It's always a little foreshortened by the camera.
Well, it wouldn't surprise me if Kashekin loses half a minute or more to Luke Durbridge. Durbridge setting an incredible standard there of 6 minutes, 38 seconds. And Kashekin coming to the finish line outside of 7 minutes.
Well, there's a long way down for him. Still no change at the top of the leaderboard. Luke Durbridge still with that 6:38 is the man that everybody wants to beat. Welcome back to the Epic Cycle Series presented by Michelob Ultra. I'm Paul Schoen. Alongside me is Bob Roll. Out on course here, Bob. We're here with Geschke. He's not doing too bad at half distance, but still, I have to say that's an amazing time by Luke Durbridge. Durbridge, like many other riders, this is a difficult year because some guys are looking to get into the Tour de France. Other guys are thinking about straight after the Tour de France and the Olympic Games. And that is what Luke Durbridge is thinking about because he will be part of the Australian team for the team pursuit.
Well, Luke Durbridge leading the time trial so far. Put in a great prologue here. Might want to think about considering the road career. He's been a great rider on the track as we see this man, Simon Geschke, to get to the finish line. But like you said, the Olympics, that's going to be a wild card throughout the season and see how that affects the Tour de France. It'll be very interesting.
Well, it's all a question of do you ride the Tour de France, especially if you're a track rider. The track just 250 meters around, a completely different kind of effort to the Tour de France, which finishes 1 week before the Olympic Games this year. Into the finishing straight now for Geschke. Still looking at that time, it's starting to look like an impressive time, that of Luke Durbridge. 21 years of age, Bob, has set the fastest time so far, 6 minutes and 38 seconds, but there's still some very, very big names to come. What about David Miller as a name to conjure up there as well from Garmin Barracuda, as Geschke stops the clock with the 76th time. He's lost 31 seconds.
Dark clouds on the horizon. Simon Geschke coming to the finish line for the Argus Shimano team. They have been invited to do the Tour de France, and they're all looking forward to that. Very tricky to get into the Tour. Just to be invited is impressive and a great honor. Simon Geschke, perhaps part of that squad, needing to do something in this week's racing to prove his worth to his team Argus Shimano for this year's Tour de France.
Well, it's a very dodgy day. The weather conditions are really quite dubious, I'd have to say, Bob, and obviously a very clever decision by Cadel Evans, I think, now to start early. Cadel Evans, by the way, Bob, this morning admitted that he's a lot more confident with his condition leading up to the Tour de France than he was in the start of May. So that's an indication that the man, oh, look at Bob, I just don't know why they didn't cut those trees back a bit.
Dries Davenens tried to trim a few branches himself with his shoulders, and there he goes. He goes down, going a little bit too quickly through that U-turn at the end of the course.
Well, it's obviously very, very slow. Let's have a look at that once again, Bob. The problem is when the front wheel starts to go, you just cannot do anything at all, and I hope he didn't fall on the shoulder that he fractured in Paris-Nice earlier on in this season.
Well, holding his gloves, trying to get them squared away. He was involved in that very dramatic crash on the last day of racing, second to last day of racing, excuse me, when Levi Leipheimer was chasing to get back after a crash of Levi. It was this man, Dries Davenens, was trying to help Levi get back into the race in Paris-Nice earlier this spring. And here we see again him just going down there he wasn't going that quickly, but that shows you how slippery the course is.
I was just going to say that answers the question, doesn't it? The course is not yet dry. It is still very slippery, despite the fact he's come away from that corner there, Bob, and all of a sudden it's dry again. Arnaud Jonazon rides for Française des Jeux Big Mat. Now, he wore the white jersey in the Tour de France last year. One of the young new Frenchmen on the black, 14th overall. Important for him to put a good start in here.
Géançon, like you said, did wear the white jersey for a couple of days and finished high up in last year's Tour de France. He's one of the young hopes of French cycling.
This is one of the young hopes of Australian cycling. Dave Tanner had a very good season a couple of years ago when he rode for the Fly-V Australia squad. He's now a member of Team Saxo Bank. The question mark for all of these guys, Bob, as they come into the Critérium du Dauphiné is, will I make the Tour de France squad this year?
Well, there is one spot open on the Saxo Bank squad of David Tanner because Alberto Contador will not be at this year's Tour de France. He's in suspension now from the 2010 Tour de France, where he was found to have clenbuterol in his system. David Tanner, a winner last year in the Tour of Utah on stage #1. Also, the gone but not forgotten squad of Rock Racing is where David Tanner made his professional debut.
But this is Arnaud Jonazon. I have to say that the French must have been extremely satisfied last year with their performances at the Tour de France, and they'll be nurturing hopes of trying to get a man onto the podium. Last year, Thomas Voeckler was so close to a podium. Who would ever have thought that that man could have finished 4th overall in the Tour?
Great ride by all the French riders. It took a long time for the French to get a stage win, and that was Pierre Rolland, the teammate of Thomas Voeckler. But all of France tuning into the Tour because of the way that Thomas Voeckler defended the yellow jersey throughout a number of mountain stages, finally succumbing to Andy Schleck on Alpe d'Huez. But great riding in last year's Tour de France by the French. That's always good for the home country.
He's a big, strong bike rider, isn't he? David Tanner here as he gets himself again down into that low aerodynamic position, hands right in the middle of the handlebars. This is an ideal course, Bob, I have to say, for a specialist in the individual time trial, a man who's got a big engine. I'm thinking this is a course which is perfectly made for a Bradley Wiggins.
Oh, and look out there. Please, people, leash your dogs if you're going to bring them to a bike race.
Well, I tell you what, we've seen many, many accidents in the past, Bob, between bike riders and dogs. Please, I have to say, if you do go to watch a bike race and you want to take man's best friend with you, keep him on a leash.
Most definitely. David Tanner unleashed in the prologue, looking again.
Oh, I'll tell you what, the dog did have a leash on, so well done, that man. Anyway, back to David Tanner here. I have to say he is looking for a place, as you said, in the Tour de France squad for Team Saxo Bank this afternoon. There's no change still at the top end of the overall standing. Still, Luke Durbridge, the Australian national time trial champion, is the fastest man to date. Welcome back to the Critérium du Dauphiné. Don't get too excited because Luke Durbridge is the man who has the fastest time. The Australian hoping to challenge him is still, I would say, Bob, 15 to 20 seconds from the finishing line. That sweeping right-hand bend is a long way to go.
Long way to go for Tanner. When you look at the time of Luke Durbridge, he's already outside that. He's going to lose 15 or 20 seconds to the current race leader and his countryman, Luke Durbridge. Two young Australians on professional cycling, a long way from home. Luke Durbridge having a great prologue and leads the standing so far.
Well, talking about Australians, Bob, Green Edge are hoping this year to put a full Australian squad together for the Tour of Spain at the end of the season, something that's never ever been done before. In the starting house, well, it says Bill Kadri, but that in fact is Haimar Zubeldia rolling away there. Now, Haimar Zubeldia is a very good climber. He's an integral member of Team Radio Shack Nissan. Finished 10th overall in the Vuelta a España a couple of years ago, and he too will be hoping to get into the squad. It's going to be so difficult this year for Johan Bruneel to actually pick his final 9 men for the Tour de France squad.
Well, Johan said pointedly to the Schleck brothers, only one man so far has been impressive enough to qualify for the Radio Shack squad of the Tour de France, and that's Fabian Cancellara, who's just begun racing again after breaking his collarbone earlier this spring in the Tour of Flanders.
Yeah, what a nasty crash that was for Fabian Cancellara, and we will be hoping that he's going to ride well in the opening week of the Tour de France, and of course then he will transfer over to the Olympic Games in London to try and win the title that he really wants, the Olympic gold in the individual time trial.
The defending champion Cancellara in the time trial discipline from the Beijing Games in 2008. He will be seriously challenged, however, by Tony Martin, whose ascendancy has put Tony Martin in the longer time trials, probably currently the very best in the world.
Well, you mentioned that, yes, Tony Martin, again, one of those riders starting very early on, Bob. Again, the Dauphiné race that we're looking at here and the Tour de France is the last chance for many of these riders to get themselves ready for the individual time trial at the London Olympics. This is back here with Arnaud de Jonazon, and he looks to be struggling a little bit. You see the top half of his body, he's trying to keep that big gear ticking over, Bob, but he's having a hard time with it. And look at his number. He's done everything he can to make his bicycle as aerodynamic as possible, the aerodynamic skin suit, and yet his number there is not pinned down properly, and it's flapping around in the wind.
Well, when you see the riders that win these prologues, they leave absolutely no attention to detail unlooked at, and a guy like Luke Durbridge, absolutely as aerodynamic as possible. And you sometimes see in French cyclists especially not as much attention to detail given for the time trialing discipline, and it's been a long time since they were competitive that it has mattered. They're always competitive on the open road. You always see them in the breakaways in the Tour de France, and we'll see if they can produce an overall contender in the years to come in the Tour de France. It's been a very long time. Bernard Hinault, the last Frenchman to win the Tour, way back in 1985.
Well, one wonders now, Bob, when you talk about the Frenchman getting into the breakaway, I wonder if they'll give a certain amount of freedom to Thomas Vogler this year when he goes through to the Tour de France, because last year he got into the breakaway and they thought, let's not worry about Thomas Vogler, we'll get rid of him in the mountains. Well, that didn't happen very easily, did it?
Not until 3 days to go from the end of the bike race on Alpe d'Huez was Andy Schleck able to get the jersey, but he lost it to Cadel Evans the next day in the time trial in this city of Grenoble.
Well, here we go. Jonazon coming up to the line here. A lot of these riders are struggling with the precarious, dangerous conditions out on the course. But amazingly enough, this should be one of the safest time trial courses around, and yet one or two riders are coming to grips with the difficult corners. Jonazon has lost a huge chunk of time, 34 seconds for him. Watch out for him, though, in the mountains later on in the week.
Jonazon, a good climber. The time trial always struggling in this discipline. To win big bike races, however, you have to do everything well, including to do a good prologue. You can't lose 5, 10, 15 seconds in such a short distance. That translates to much more time once we get into the mountains. And the 53-kilometer, or about 35-mile time trial on stage number 4.
This is Yuri Trofimov, the Russian rider from Team Katusha. Hasn't won a race since 2009, but in fact, if you go back to 2009, 2008, he was the winner of the Étoile de Bessèges, and he won a stage in the Dauphiné Libéré on that occasion. He's a fairly good individual time trialist. He was third last year in the Russian National Road Racing Championships. But here you get it to, oh, Bob, this is a dodgy corner. It really is.
I wonder if some of the precipitation has not seeped out of the trees and is falling onto this section of road. The rider's really struggling with that U-turn, the second U-turn of the race course. Haimar Zubeldia trying to accelerate back up to speed. He's got just over 2 kilometers to the finish line.
Well, he had a great victory last year. He was the winner of the San Sebastian Classic. But, Bob, that's another important point that you picked there. You've got to actually be in the right gear, haven't you, to negotiate a 180-degree bend, because you're almost stopping, and you've got to be in the right gear to accelerate again.
That's a big part of bike racing, is shifting, anticipating what gear you need to be in, and accelerate out of the turns. You want to shift back up the cassette in the back to have a smaller gear to get back up to speed, and then shift back down. Very tricky, technical discipline, the individual time trial.
I would say that if a guy is not very good at handling those 180-degree bends, he could lose at least 10 seconds per bend. That could be a big difference at the end of the day in what is a power course, I would have to say, this afternoon. We're looking here at Tropimov. Still Luke Durbridge is hanging on and flying the golden flag very high for Australia, just ahead of Andre Grifko at 3 seconds. Carlos Barredo is still in third. Tomorrow, the Epic Cycle Series presented by Michelob Ultra continues with stage 1 of the Critérium du Dauphiné. We'll leave the flat roads of Grenoble behind into the hills for the first time tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern on the NBC Sports Network. So, Bob, as we look down on the River Isère, there's Haimar Zubeldia. He will be looking for a very expensive slot on the Radio Shack Nissan Trek squad for the Tour de France this year. Around the corner he goes. He's never been a great individual time trialist, but this man is a man to have as part of a team if you want to win the Tour.
Well, he's already done the Tour de France 10 times in his career, and 11th probably be within his capabilities. He's been 5th twice before in the Tour de France, back in 03 when Lance won his 5th Tour, and also in 2007. Haimar Zubeldia, one of the strongest performers consistently in the Tour de France in the mountain stages.
Well, there's a lot of big names still to come as Zubeldia stops the clock there with the 45th best time, Bob. In about 20 minutes, we'll see the start of Thomas Voeckler. There'll be a large shout from the French crowd there. Richie Porte, an Australian rider on Team Sky, as we go back here to Yuri Tropimov, and it is still very damp around that corner. Everybody is a little bit frightened by it.
Well, looking for the dry part of the road there, was right in the center of that roundabout, so he was avoiding the leaves on the side. I think they're still shaking off a little bit of water on the leaves, shaking off some water into the camera lens there as they follow Yuri Trofimov to the finish line.
Well, Manuel Kinziata, former European time trial champion, also a strong member of the BMC racing squad from the United States, hoping to defend the victory of Cadel Evans. Cadel Evans will use the Critérium du Dauphiné this year to try and make sure that he's got the form to defend that title when we come up to the month of July. He is a very good bike rider. Now we're looking back here at Trofimov. All of these riders now, Bob, are starting to put in pretty good times coming up to this point, but they seem to take an awful long time to do this last 300 meters.
Well, Trofimov most certainly will not challenge a time of Luke Durbridge, a flying 6:38. Trofimov already outside of that time was still a long ways to go, but some riders still to come, especially Bradley Wiggins, will hope to challenge the time of Luke Durbridge. And Andy Schleck, it is 0 hour for Andy Schleck. He has to start performing, and doing a good prologue would be great for Andy Schleck's morale.
Well, it certainly would. He lost a minute, by the way, let's not forget, in the opening time trial of the Paris-Nice race this year, over 9 kilometers. What is he going to lose today? I don't mean that in a derogatory way. He will lose time, but for him it's a question, has his time trialing improved over the last couple of months? Looking now, though, that this man, Manuel Kinziato, bobbing around, as I said, former European time trial champion, an integral part of the BMC squad. He, too, going around that corner. Look at the way he leans over, Bob. It's almost, you've got to go around those corners. You've got to put your right knee out a little bit on a right-hand sweeper like that, just to lower the center of gravity a fraction.
Lower the center of gravity, try to get around the corners as quickly as possible. Kinziato, instrumental in helping Cadel Evans win last year's Tour de France. When you try to win the Tour, and they were criticized for the way they rode in the first week of racing, and Kinziato at the front, the very front, even during the lead-outs for the sprinters, but that kept Cadel out of trouble, and we saw how many of our pre-race favorites crash out of the Tour. That's going to be a big part of international cycling in every stage race that we go forward with, the Giro, the Tour de France, the Vuelta a España. If you want to win a big Grand Tour, you have to stay in the front for 3 weeks of racing, and a rider like this man, Manuel Kinziato, has to be strong enough to be able to do that. He's been asked to do 100, 150, 200 kilometers on a long flat stage stage near the front, keeping the leader, Cadel Evans, out of trouble. And this is a man worth his weight in gold when you want to try to win the Tour de France.
Well, Bob, let's just talk about BMC racing. If we look at Quinziato coming up to the finishing line here, when George Hincapie and Cadel Evans decided to move across to a small American local racing team, BMC, everyone said, what are they doing? They are absolutely mad. And today, it's a big powerhouse of a team. They've brought riders in left and right now. They've got some of the best bike riders in the world, including, question mark as well, for me in the Dauphiné this year, Philippe Gilbert. What's he going to do?
And what about Thor Hushovd? Has virtually shown none of the power that saw him win 2 stages in last year's Tour de France. They have a lot of stars, and we'll see how BMC does in this week's Dauphiné.
Well, this is Quinziato now. Look at his face here. He's really pushed himself here this afternoon. He's not going to challenge Luke Durbridge, the Australian, who still leads this race here this afternoon, but he's pushing it all the way to the line, and Quinziato is going to stop the clock there with 59th place. So no change in the overall standings. The big guns still yet to fire at the Dauphiné. Welcome back to the Critérium du Dauphiné. This is Michael Matthews, one of the sprinters of Team Rabobank in this race, which is 1,050 kilometers in 8 days of racing and 652 miles. But Bob, the Critérium du Dauphiné is not made for sprinters like Michael Matthews. This is a race for the climbers.
Michael Matthews, under 23 world champion a couple of years ago, racing for the Dutch squad of Rabobank. He also won the biggest one-day race in Germany, the Rundum or the Tour of Cologne. He is a sprinter. Today's stage might favor him, but the stages in the mountains most certainly will not.
Well, an interesting thing there, Bob, about the fact that when he won that under 23 road racing championships, he was actually shortlisted for the time trial, decided to miss the time trial because he wanted to concentrate on the road race. He felt his chance was much better of a win there, and he sidelined himself. As we go back to the starting house now, this is Simone Stortoni, the Italian rider on Team Lampre ISD, riding away from the starting line there. And he too, not a bad ride, you know. A couple of years ago in 2010, Bob, he finished second on a stage up to one of the mountaintop finishes in the Giro d'Italia.
Well, that was Monte Terminillo, and this man, Simone Stortoni, finished second on that stage to Chris Anker Sorensen, the climber of the Saxo Bank squad. You know, Lampre still looking for some big results on this year's season. Michele Scarponi, it was hoped he would defend his Giro d'Italia title from 2011. He was unable to do that. And their sprinter, Alessandro Patacchi, honestly off form as well. He did win three stages of the Bayern Rundfahrt. He is one of the winningest cyclists in all of cycling currently racing.
Well, he currently is, as you mentioned, Bob, the biggest winner of races since the retirement of Robin McEwen, just at the end of the Amgen Tour of California. Sad to see Robin McEwen retire from the sport after a long and illustrious career. This man is hoping to replace him. Had a good start to the season with a victory in the Clásica de Almería, but he crashed out very dramatically, if you remember, on the opening stage of the Amgen Tour of California, within a smelling distance of the finishing line when he thought he was going to get that first win.
Oh, Rabobank, a lot of bad luck in the sprint finishes of late. In the Giro, half the team fell off on stage number 1 out on the open roads, and the sprint game is very, very tough. Mike Matthews, one of the toughest guys out there. Pretty good time here against Luke Durbridge, his countryman, another Australian fast man coming to the finishing straightaway. He's the closest we've seen in a long time of racers.
Well, he's not going to challenge Luke Durbridge, but he was a couple of years back in 2009 the time trial champion of Oceania, which basically is a grouping of all of the southern hemisphere areas around Australia, so he can ride a very good individual time trial. But for Michael Matthews here, bling they call him, by the way, because he likes to wear a lot of bling when he can get a chance to put on his relaxed gear. 31st time for Matthews. Not a bad ride for a sprinter.
Well, the bling doesn't help you in the time trial. You want to be as aerodynamic as possible, and he's kept all of that bling under his jersey. Coming to the finish line, this is the closest we've seen any man get to Luke Durbridge. 13 seconds slower. Mike Matthews, solid time trialist, a very fast sprinter as well. That time of Luke Durbridge looming large now, looking more and more solid as we get to the later starters in the Prologue time trial.
Yeah, but Bob, look at the names still to come as we look here at the position of Simone Stortoni. You've still got Bradley Wiggins, Yanni Brakovic, Jürgen van den Broek, and a little bit further up, Sammy Sanchez, the outgoing Olympic champion, and of course David Miller. Watch out for David Miller.
David Miller, a great time trialist. That's where he's built his career. He's won a number of them in years past. A little bit of controversy in England about whether or not he will be allowed to do the Olympic Games. The UCI asking the Olympic Committee to prevent anybody that's been in a doping controversy from doing the Olympics, and that might be a serious blow to England. England's chances in the road race and the time trial if David Miller is not allowed to compete in the Olympics?
Well, that's a question that'll go all the way up to the Olympic Games and will probably be debated right the way through the Tour de France as well. As 138 here. Looking at this man's position, Bob, he's a slightly built rider. I have to say that this man is obviously a pretty good climber.
Very good climber, second in a stage of the mountains of the Giro d'Italia, one of the mountainous stage races in the world. This is a completely different discipline. It asks for a completely different set of physiological parameters, and most climbers really struggle against the clock, especially in such a short, violent effort as a 3.5-mile individual time trial to start the proceedings of this week's racing in the Dauphiné. It's called the Prologue.
Well, we're now looking at Nicolas Vaugondy, rides for Team Cofidis. He's a former national road racing champion, former national time trial champion of France. And funnily enough, back in 2010, he was refused a license by the French Federation because he had a little bit of a heart murmur. To have a professional license to race in France, you actually have to undergo a very strict physical examination during the winter. If you don't pass, you don't get a license. However, he was cleared in April of that year to race, and at 34 years of age, he is still a stalwart of Team Cofidis.
He turned pro way back in 1997. One of the longest live pros in the game. Also, after he was allowed his license, he got 6th in the 2010 Dauphiné, this race right here.
You're right, Bob, and in fact, he won a stage in that year's Dauphiné, but still the big guns yet to fire here in the Dauphiné. Welcome back to the Epic Cycle Series presented by Michelob Ultra. We are at the Critérium du Dauphiné, and it's the opening day 3.5-mile prologue time trial. I'm Paul Show, and alongside me is Bob Roll. And amazingly, a man who started very, very early on, Luke Durbridge. Durbo the Turbo, they call him in Australia, has set the fastest time, Bob, and it still stands.
Fantastic high cadence, also dry roads for Luke Durbridge. That's made a big difference for the later stars. We'll see what the weather conditions do to the men still to come, guys like Bradley Wiggins.
Simone Stortoni of Team Lamprey coming up to the line. We're getting a lot of riders around about the 7-minute marker, losing around about the 30 seconds. It just really does, doesn't it, Bob, put into perspective the performance of Luke Durbridge. We're now here with Nicolas Vaugondy. He can ride a very good time trial. You see the red, white and blue on his sleeves there. That's an indicator he's a former national time trial champion of France.
Foregoing the shoe covers that are a little bit more aerodynamic than the shoes and socks. But Vaugondy out on the course, and 2 more U-turns for Vaugondy before the finish.
Thomas Voeckler, this man needs absolutely no introduction. You can almost feel the nervousness of this man. 4th overall in the Tour de France last year, wore the yellow jersey for 9 days. Now, this is Sepp van Mark, a very good Belgian rider on Team Garmin Barracuda. He's not going to put in a performance this afternoon to get himself into the Tour de France, but in the past, he has been an integral part of this team during the big one-day classics.
He has started his campaign for the Garmin squad with a huge win in Het Nieuwsblad, the big race to start the Belgian racing season. Quite a bit slower than Durbridge, but you could excuse Garmin for taking it a little bit easy on today's stage. They are dancing in the streets after having won the Giro d'Italia just a week ago with Ryder Hagedal.
Well, taking a page out of Phil Liggett's book, I'd have to say Thomas Voeckler is wearing a lucky number here this afternoon, number 51. You notice that little circular thing just underneath the saddle there? Well, that's for putting a bottle in the longer time trials. But in 3.5 miles, Bob, you don't need to drink too much, do you?
You don't need to take 1 sip of water. You should be well hydrated before the start, though. You shouldn't need to take any water out on the course in 3.5 miles. It's all about aerodynamics. It's all about cadence, leg speed, and also technically sweeping through the corners as quickly as possible. Thomas Voeckler, great Tour de France last summer, 9 days in the yellow jersey, and he really reignited the French passion for the sport of cycling. He's a huge star, maybe the biggest star in all of French sports.
Probably, Bob, the thing that would have to say a negative to Thomas Voeckler is he had too much success early on and too much fame. By getting the yellow jersey for 10 days in the Tour de France, there were too much expectations put on his shoulder. He had to retire a little bit from the sport and bring himself back up to where he is now. And this year, he's had a phenomenal season. 8th in the Tour of Flanders, 5th in the Amstel Gold Race, 4th in Liège-Bastogne-Liège. Is he inkling at trying to be the next Frenchman to win the Tour?
He could very well be the next Frenchman to win the Tour. It's been a very long time. 27 years it will be this summer since Bernard Hinault was the last Frenchman to win the Tour de France for the United States. We've had 2 riders win the Tour de France in years past since then, and a lot of countries that had never been successful in the Tour, also with wins, especially Cadel Evans from Australia, the winner of last year's Tour de France, a historical hotspot of cycling. The inventors of the sport, basically, of the 3-week stage race, the Tour de France, is this man's country, Thomas Voeckler, the Frenchman, and the biggest star of French cycling.
So funnily enough, though, Thomas Voeckler grew up in the Caribbean on the island of Guadeloupe. We're now back with Nicolas Vaugondy down in that position, very strong, Bob. It's hard to find a balance, isn't it, between strength and aerodynamics.
And that's why the specialists are so good and open up so much time against the riders not specialized in the time trial discipline. You watch Bradley Wiggins, for example, do the time trial. Hardly any movement from the front to the back of the saddle. He's rock solid in his position, and he is absolutely the best in the business in the stage racing discipline of time trial.
Well, this is Vaugondy from Team Cofidis, a team that's been a big supporter of cycling for many, many years. But we're now, Bob, getting down to the part when the specialists are about to come out and play. Why not a guy like Richie Porte, the Australian rider on Team Sky, Luis Leon Sanchez, to throw a few names in, Sylvain Chavanel, and of course David Miller, all big time trial specialists. They know the time to beat. They know they've got to beat 6 minutes and 38 seconds. Nicolas Vaugondy is not going to do that, but I'd have to say that's a fairly respectable time for the Frenchman.
Decent ride for Vaugondy. He's got a week to prove himself, already a stage winner in years past in the Dauphiné, and looking for a spot on the Cofidis French squad in the upcoming Tour de France, starting a little bit early this year. It will start June 30th in Liège, Belgium.
Well, just looking at the sprockets there on the back of that bike there for Thomas Voeckler, I'm a little bit surprised, Bob, to see the wide ratio of sprockets that he's got. You'd want to have a very close ratio cluster for an individual time trial like this, bearing in mind it is completely pan flat and there's only a couple of nasty corners.
A couple of nasty corners. You want to switch up to the smaller gears, the easier gears to pedal. When you come out of those corners, that gives you a little bit of an advantage in accelerating back up to top speed. When Voeckler comes back down this very same straightaway, he'll have just 2 kilometers or 1.2 miles to go before the finish line.
Yeah, you know, he's had a very international season this year so far, Thomas Voeckler. He won a race in Gabon, by the way, in the tropical Amisa Bongo on the western side of the continent of Africa. But for me, the biggest indication, he's like all these riders, Bob, having a little bit of difficulty with those trees on the right-hand side, and a little bit of a problem with his gearing as well as he gets out of the saddle to try and keep the pace nice and high. Thomas Voeckler out on course. Wonder if he can challenge the top. Saturday, June 30th, the NBC Sports Network begins the coverage of the Tour de France, cycling's most prestigious event. The Tour de France begins Saturday, June 30th on the NBC Sports Network. As we look down here on Thomas Voeckler wearing number 51 in the green jersey of Europcar, trying to lay down foundations for his attack at the Tour de France in July. This man, Richie Porte, I find it very hard to believe. I spoke to the team manager of Team Sky this morning, Sean Yates, an old teammate of yours. He said Richie Porte is not yet guaranteed of a spot in Team Sky for the Tour de France, despite the fact that he's 3 kilograms lighter than he was last year. He's home-tuned and fine placed to get himself into the Tour de France team, yet he hasn't been guaranteed a spot.
Well, Sky has a number of superstars in their roster, and I think they're now trying to consider who they're going to race for in the Tour de France. Mark Cavendish, the sprinter on the team, one of the most successful bike racers in the world currently, and Bradley Wiggins, both of them on Team Sky. Bradley Wiggins hoping to contend for the yellow jersey as overall winner. Those are almost two opposites, and it's very tough to have a team divided to try to be successful in both disciplines, the overall standing and the sprint stages.
Well, a man who's been the champion of Belgium in the road race at Stijn de Volder, looking to try and rekindle his career, I would have to say, Bob, because he's wallowed around for a long time. Having been a specialist at the one-day races, Paris-Roubaix and Tour de Flanders, the team manager of Omega Quickstep said, sorry, mate, I'm not paying a bloke for 1 year to race for 1 day.
Well, Stijn de Volder's won Tour of Flanders twice, like you said. He was teammates with Tom Bonen. Very tough to have those two superstars on the same team. But Stijn de Volder's found a very good program in Vacances Soleil.
Now, this is not a bad time here by Thomas Voeckler. Bear in mind, when he takes the sweeping right-hand bend, he's still got about 15 seconds to go to the finish line. I think he looks very solid on his machine.
Well, Voeckler has earned the respect of the French public. He was given a lot of it for free by vent of being in the yellow jersey for 10 days as a young professional way back in 2004, eventually succumbing to Lance Armstrong in the mountains. But Thomas Voeckler, because of that, was a big superstar of French cycling, and they followed him everywhere. But now he's definitely earned his place at the high ranks of French cycling with 9 days in last year's Tour de France and 4th overall.
You might just spot the dimpling on the helmet there. That's to make it that little bit more aerodynamic, just like a golf ball, as Thomas Voeckler stops the clock in 36th place. And that, I think, will be very satisfactory for him as he looks to be aggressive as we go out onto the open road tomorrow. We're straight into the hills tomorrow, Bob, on the time. There's this Richie Porte now getting around that corner. Everybody seems to be having difficulties with these corners.
Well, it was Voeckler's ability to attack and be aggressive that he got the yellow jersey in last year's Tour into breakaway, and a lot of stages in the first few days of this Dauphiné favor that type of rider. Watch for Voeckler to be attacking. This man, Richie Porte, a great time trialist. He's had a lot of success in this discipline in his career. He won a stage of the Tour of Romandy in the individual time trial. Also the Tour of Algarve earlier this spring. He was also the overall winner of that. He spent 4 days in the pink jersey as leader of the Giro d'Italia, and he did finish 7th overall in the Giro. To have him not in the Tour de France roster for the Sky team, well, we'll have to see what their tactics are as they go into the Tour.
So Jazun is a team from France. They rode exceptionally well in the Tour de France last year. This is Julien Simon, no relation at all to the Simon brothers who raced in the mid-1980s, but he does come from the heart and the hotbed of French cycling. He's a Breton from Brittany.
And that is where Bernard Hinault, the great French superstar, 5 times winner of the Tour de France, comes. Windswept. It's hard to imagine that some of the best climbers in French cycling come from one of the flattest regions in the far west-hand north corner of the country in the Breton.
Yes, it really is the hotbed. If you take Brittany and the north of France, those are the 2 areas where cycling is at its best. But the big names, Bob, are starting to come into the starting house right now, and I'm waiting to see very shortly the arrival of a certain Luis Leon Sanchez getting to the starting house, because he has had a brilliant season so far this year, and he's an integral part now of the Team Rabobank squad. And here he is, a champion of Spain. That's why his jersey is slightly different. Luis Leon Sanchez, we saw him an integral part of the victory of Robert Hessing in the recent Amgen Tour of California.
He did a great turn of work in the Mount Baldy stage at the Amgen Tour of California that just finished 1 week ago. Luis Leon Sanchez, one of the big stars of Spanish cycling, and just this week he's been named to the Olympic team for Spain, and they're hoping to win again. They'll defend the title of Sammy Sanchez, who won in Beijing.
Well, just having a quick look, this seems to be one of the best turns I've seen so far as we see Richie Porte go around there. And I think, Bob, in fact, it has dried up a fraction. That's why he's able to get round there. Didn't lose too much impetus at all. As we've said, he's had a very good start to the season, but for him, he's got to ride solidly in the Criterium du Dauphiné if he wants to get one of those last few spots on Team Sky for the Tour de France.
Well, his teammate Bradley Wiggins won Romandy earlier this year, and Richie Porte did great work. Awesome teamwork for Bradley Wiggins in the Tour of Romandy, on the flat stages and in the hilly stages, and it was Bradley Wiggins that won his 2nd stage race of the year, Tour of Romandy.
Well, still Luke Durbridge is at the top of the leaderboard. We'll take a very short break. We'll wait for the big boys. Register and enter the words Fondo. Sylvain Chavanel, former champion of France in the individual time trial, and Bob, over the last couple of seasons, what a one-day classics rider this man has become.
Sylvain Chavanel made a radical maneuver to join a Belgian team a couple of years ago, the Omega Quick-Step squad, and they've become the most successful team so far this season. 34 wins so far for the Omega Quick-Step squad, and Sylvain Chavanel, integral part of their classics campaign. He is a great racer from France.
Well, look at the time here now, Bob, because Richie Porte knows he's got to do a good individual time trial. It's a long way from that corner. Between 20 to 25 seconds, I reckon, is the time it takes from this sweeping bend here. Now, as Richie Porte can see the finishing line. On the bridge above the finishing line, he can see the time to beat at 6 minutes and 38 seconds.
Started his career as a triathlete, and the time trial discipline is a big part of that sport. Richie Porte has always been good at the time trial discipline. He is the closest so far to the time of Luke Durbridge, just going outside of it now.
Well, he's only just gone outside, but he's going to change the top 10 in the overall standings. Well, he's not actually 11th. He's just slipped outside, but I think he has laid down the foundations there. Probably for Bradley Wiggins. Bear in mind, it's the same team. And the team manager, Bob, he will go out behind that rider and take time checks and be able to use them and communicate those to Bradley Wiggins, who will be the last man to start. But this man, 181, Luis Leon Sanchez, champion of Spain in the individual time trial. When he won the Santos Tour Down Under many, many years ago, they said this will be the new Miguel Indurain. He hasn't yet become that, but he's had a fantastic season so far.
Solid teamwork for Robert Hasink, who won the Amgen Tour of California recently. He also was the leader of Romandy, a big stage race, and eventually succumbing to Bradley Wiggins on the last day in the time trial after being the leader.
Well, one of the toughest races on the calendar is the 3 days of La Panna in April. It's used by a lot of riders to prepare for the Tour of Flanders, and this man won the 3 days of La Panna this year using the individual time trial. He looks very solid on his machine, Bob, and the aero position is ideal.
Rare for a Frenchman, also good in the climbs, the classics, and the time trialing discipline. Sylvain Chavanel out on course.
Now that is smooth. That is smooth as you like around that corner. He's used all of the line that he can. Puts himself now back up to top speed again. He's a big man to ride a bike, but he did win 2 stages, as you mentioned, Bob, of the Tour of Romandy this year, and he wrested the yellow jersey, the leader's jersey, away from Bradley Wiggins, only to lose it in the individual time trial, but that was right uphill to the ski resort of Crans-Montana.
Luis Leon Sanchez having a rare bad day in the final stage of the Tour of Romandy to give the leader's jersey up. He had an absolutely disastrous time trial on that. Bounced back, though, in the Tour of California last week and helped his teammate Robert Hasink become the first Dutchman to win the Amgen Tour of California.
What a great race that was up to the summit of Mount Baldy, but now we're talking a different thing. We've moved our interest away from the United States back to the old school of Europe, the Critérium du Dauphiné, the 64th edition of this race, and for many, many years, Bob, this has been where the guys who want to win the Tour de France lay down their final foundations for a hopeful victory.
Sylvain Chavanel, presumably on the start list of the Tour de France for the Omega Quick-Step squad, looking for another green jersey for his teammate Tom Bonen, and Sylvain Chavanel will be asked to do the tempo and the lead out if Tom Bonen is going to win the green jersey again. Tom Bonen, a great return to the top of the sport, winning Flanders and Paris-Roubaix earlier this year, and with help from Sylvain Chavanel.
Well, this man, as you said, integral part in the Amgen Tour of California. He's been successful at the Tour de France in the past. He's a classy bike rider, Bob. When you just see the position that he's got on his machine, he looks as if he's at one with the bike.
Very versatile bike racer, very classy, like you said, and it's one thing to be a good bike racer, it's another to dedicate yourself to the chances of your teammates, and Luis Leon Sanchez was able to do that for Robert Hasink at the Tour of California.
Well, we haven't talked about this man, David Miller. Garmin Barracuda is a very good time trialist, won the final time trial in the Giro d'Italia last year. He's an integral part of this team. He's hoping that he will go to ride for the Olympic team of Great Britain and try and get a gold medal for Mark Cavendish here. He's out on the blocks. He is the sort of rider, Bob, I think, who could challenge Luke Durbridge.
Well, he was one of the men that brought the Garmin team up to the top end of the sport, signed for Garmin, and now they just won the Giro d'Italia. What a great result for the American
Oh, look at this, though. Look at this. Another good ride by Luis Leon Sanchez. They're getting closer and closer to that time. I reckon, though, Bob, you've got to go around that corner at around about 6:10 if you're going to beat Luke Durbridge here this afternoon. So Luis Leon Sanchez is not going to do that, but his thought is further down the road. He's thinking about a high place in the overall standings, and seconds gained or lost today will be important at the end of the week.
Just slipping away from Luke Durbridge. That is your leader, Luis Leon Sanchez, leading time, but that's going to go now. He's in second. He's just by the finish line. Good ride by Luis Leon Sanchez.
Not a bad ride at all by this man, but look at his face as he crosses the line of 15th place. This has been a hard 3.5-mile test for everybody.
When you see that he lost that much time to Luke Durbridge, even though he went as hard as he possibly was capable of, fantastic time by Luke Durbridge. It's going to be tough for anybody to beat that. Maybe the last starter of the day, Bradley Wiggins, can do it.
Sylvain Chavanel, champion of France in the individual time trial, champion of France in the road race as well. He now knows that the time to beat is 6:38. Poor old Luke Durbridge, Bob. You know, you've got to worry back. He started number 26 on the start list. He's been sitting in his hotel room not too far away from the finishing line, probably watching this live, wondering whether or not he's going to have to come down for the presentation at the end of the day.
Well, it's been nearly 2.5 hours since Luke Durbridge started start of this race, and he's been sitting on pins and needles ever since. Some riders getting a little bit closer now. Luis Leon Sanchez, that will make you nervous when he gets that close in a short distance like this for Luke Durbridge's lead.
And of course he knows there's still some big names yet to come out of the starting house. This is Chavanel around the corner. They're all battling with this final 350 meters. It's a very difficult course here this afternoon. It's a flat drag strip racing course, if you like, this afternoon, as Chavanel now accelerates up towards the line. He's looking at 6:38. He will not get it here this afternoon, but it's a good ride by the Frenchman. Chavanel stops the clock with the 7th best time, only a few seconds out. Bob, still Luke Durbridge is hanging on to the overall lead, and he realizes that the big names are starting to come into the starting house, and very shortly the start will be given to Bradley Wiggins, defending champion. Welcome back to the Critérium du Dauphiné 2012, the 64th edition of this race. We're here with David Miller of Garmin Barracuda. Bob, this man has always been a very good individual time trialist, but it seems to me that he lacks a little bit of the top speed for the shorter events. He's much better at the long ones. As we go now down to Vincenzo Nibali, decided not to participate in the Giro d'Italia this year, preferred the Amgen Tour of California as part of his preparation for the Tour de France. And then from there to the Critérium du Dauphiné to fine-tune his climbing skills.
Nibali, one of the best Italian cyclists currently, winner of the Vuelta a España, and a big hope of Italian cycling, the leader of the Liquigas Cannondale squad. After the time trial of the Amgen Tour of California recently, he was spoken of as a man that could win the overall title, but faltered in Mount Baldley and finished 33rd, rather lowly on GC. Nibali still finding his form for the upcoming Tour de France, and Nibali's gambling his whole season on success at the Tour.
Well, if we want to talk about success at the Tour, one man who is looking for success at the Tour de France, of course, is Andy Schleck. He's not very good at the individual time trial, but he can climb mountains. That's why today he's going to be our Michelob Ultra athlete profile.
So this is going to be a first as well. Brothers on the podium. Their ambition was to be first and second. They've had to be content with second and third, but they have been the most gracious men in defeat as they were in attack.
I was second again. It was not meant to be, but it was a hard tour. Didn't see a major time gap until of the stage of Galibier, where I took big risks, but I succeeded.
Well, this has had to have shocked the race leaders, because he's gone so far from the finish. They will be unwise not to react to this.
We looked to the stages, and I think it was four days before, and I said, you would show some balls if you do that.
The legs are folding beneath his body here. He will win the stage, and that he thoroughly deserved.
I was really happy, not just that I won the stage, but that my idea, my plan went through. Of course, I would have liked to be in yellow, but I was okay with my performance over the tour. A major bonus was that I could stand with my brother on the podium. Well, what does people do? They criticize when two guys sitting in a bar and they're talking about how beautiful the weather is out there. That's not interesting. It's much more interesting if you criticize politics or sport athletes. We tried. I don't deny that I did some mistakes in the tour. I'm not a specialist in time trial. I just went all in, gave everything I had, but halfway through I felt it's not going to be good.
He got his hands on yellow, and it's been ripped off his back by the time trial.
This year I get the best people on my side, and I hope that we can work on that I don't lose the tour anymore. You know, the day I don't do any mistake, and the day everything runs perfect, I'm probably in yellow in Paris.
And that's our Michelob Ultra athlete profile. Bob, I have to say, though, with ifs and buts, if the wind had been in a different direction on that big mountainous stage, this man could have run out the winner of the Tour de France last year.
Well, facing an incredible headwind, nevertheless, he did a spectacular ride on the stage of the Galibier, pulled himself back into contention, won the yellow jersey on Alpe d'Huez, but succumbed to Cadel Evans in this discipline, the individual time trial on the penultimate day of last year's Tour de France.
Andy Schleck is now facing up to what is his nemesis, his Achilles heel, the individual time trial, the part of the sport that he hates. And today, fortunately for him, it's only 3.5 miles long. But later in this week, Bob, he's going to face a 33-mile individual test. And he knows it's important to line up well in the individual time trial if he wants to win the Tour de France this year. Well, it's taken an awful long time. Andy Schleck hasn't had a lot to write home about when it comes to performances this year, but after a year and a half debate, on the 29th of May, he was awarded the yellow jersey, Bob, as the winner of the 2010 Tour de France.
Well, directly after the Tour in 2010, Alberto Contador, it was announced, had clenbuterol, a banned substance, in his system, and eventually, after appeals, he was stripped of that title, which was awarded to Andy Schleck, and the jersey given just a few days ago on May 29th.
Yes, that may well inspire him to greater things during the Dauphiné here this week, and he knows how important his rendezvous is in the month of July. Out on the course with an elliptical chainring there to try and get over the top dead center of his pedaling action as smoothly as possible is David Miller, the time trial specialist, Bob, of Garmin Barracuda.
Well, these are very specialized machines. They're not great at going around corners, but they are fantastic at maintaining forward momentum, and that's what it's all about in the individual race of truth, the race against the clock. David Miller, one of the great specialists of this era in the time trialing discipline.
Well, it looks to me as if he's on a decent performance here this afternoon. You notice, Bob, how he just keeps putting his head down. It's a dangerous thing to do. You can't do it if you're riding your bike out on the open road. But for an athlete like him, it makes him that extra little bit aerodynamic.
You have to sight down the road and then put your head down, duck under the wind there. And David Miller, one of the best at the business, being able to calculate how slow he needs to go through the corners and how fast he can go by putting his head down. That just that little bit more aerodynamic in the long straightaways.
All of these riders have known exactly what they have to do this afternoon. They have to go inside of 6 minutes and 38 seconds, 0.62, and that is the time that was recorded by Luke Durbridge what seems like hours and hours ago in the Critérium du Dauphiné. Miller is going to go close, but not close enough here this afternoon, but watch out for him in the long time trial in a couple of days' time, because that is where he is the specialist. Miller is going to go outside of the top 10. He'll stop the clock there in 16th place, but not much time, Bob, just 9 seconds adrift.
9.5 seconds slower than Luke Durbridge, the current leader. That's a good ride by David Miller.
The champion of France in the individual time trial rolls away now. Christophe Kern turned professional back in 2003. The big guns now, Bob, are all starting to fire. Now let's see how Andy Schleck handles this corner.
I have to say, that didn't look as fast as some of the other riders out on course. Andy Schleck, now he has dry roads. That bodes well for Bradley Wiggins, who's going to start in a few minutes' time. But Andy Schleck, you know what amazes me, Paul? He's one of the best descenders in the business. He has no trouble whatsoever going down the mountains of the Tour de France. He's great on the descents, but cornering, a very different discipline, he always struggles in that, and that hinders him in the individual time trial.
But Bob, also, let's not forget we're riding different bicycles today. This is not his normal road machine, and you don't feel quite as comfortable sometimes when you get onto your aerodynamic bike. We go back to the finish. This is Anthony Roux of Française des Jeux, turned professional in 2008. 12th best time for him. Sneaked in a bit of a surprise there.
Good ride by Anthony Roux, stage winner of the Vuelta a España, one of the fastest Frenchmen, a new generation of riders here. He also won the Circuit de la Sarthe last year. That's a solid ride by Anthony Roux.
Well, Denny Menchov, Team Katusha, the Russian rider on the Russian squad. As we go now back to Andy Schleck out of the saddle. He knows how important this individual time trial is for him. But Bob, you know, he can climb like an angel, this man, very much like the Roxenberger who won the Tour de France, Charlie Gall could. This man, when you see him in a mountain, is a great climber, and as he said himself in that little interview, he knows how to attack. And to win the Tour de France, you have to attack. Vincenzo Nibali, he too knows that he wants to be a winner of the Tour de France. Only the fifth Italian rider ever to win the Vuelta a España.
Vuelta a España champion Vincenzo Nibali on the Liquigas Cannondale squad. Hoped to do a good ride at the Tour of California. Wound up 33rd, but he's building his form. He's put his whole season into the Tour de France.
The new star of stage racing for Belgium now, Jurgen van den Broek, crashed out of the Tour de France last year dramatically with Alexander Vinokourov. What a Tour de France that would have been if everybody had stayed upright.
Oh, most certainly. Jurgen van den Broek rue that crash. He broke 3 ribs and had to drop out of the Tour. But one of the big stars of Belgian cycling, and Belgium, let's face it, one of the cycling most crazy fans in the world come from Belgium. And when Van den Broek got 5th in the Tour de France in 2010, well, all pandemonium broke loose. They're hoping for him to do something special in the Tour this year.
Vincenzo Nibali started the year off very well indeed, ripping the yellow jersey of the leadership of Tirreno Adriatico away from Chris Horner to win that bike race after he won that stage 5. He has psyched himself up, prepared himself this year for a good ride in the Tour de France. He just went past the Flamme Rouge, the red kite there, 1 kilometre to go. The sweeping right-hand bend is just down in the bottom.
This will be critical for his morale in the rest of the week's racing. Nibali wanting to do a good Tour de France, 105 kilometers of time trialing, or just about 65 miles against the clock in the Tour de France. So Vincenzo Nibali looking for a good ride on today's stage.
Former winner of the Critérium du Dauphiné, Yanis Brakovic, coming out. He's a very good individual time trialist too, the champion of his country in that discipline. Will he come back to the form that saw him dangle with Alberto Contador a couple of years ago? Vincenzo Nibali is putting in a pretty decent time here, Bob, this afternoon. Still, everybody has to challenge Durbridge.
Well, Nibali, the Tour of California, doing him well, coming to the Dauphiné with some good legs. It's been a while since he was competitive before the Tour of California, after having, like you said, won the Tirreno Adriatico earlier in the year, the biggest stage race in Italy, besides the Giro, of course. Nibali coming to the finish line. This is a good ride by the Italian on the Liquigas squad.
Well, he's pushing it all the way to the line. This Vincenzo Nibali here as he comes up. This is a great ride by him. He is one of the pre-race favourites for the Critérium du Dauphiné. He will stop the clock there in 21st place. He slipped down a long way. Can anybody in this bike race now beat Luke Durbridge? Maybe Wiggins. Welcome back to the closing few riders now in the Critérium du Dauphiné. We're here with Andy Schleck from Radio Shack Nissan. He is riding the individual time trial over 3.5 miles of racing here this afternoon, 5.7 kilometers in new money, and he knows the time to beat is 6:38. Bob, he looks to me as if he's hurting.
Well, he's putting in a big effort here. If any indication is what the pain is written on his face, Andy Schleck, a lot of pressure on him. He has done absolutely nothing to justify his salary so far this year, but his big rendezvous with destiny, let's face it, is the Tour de France that starts this year, June 30th.
Well, this man is a Tour de France hopeful. This is Bradley Wiggins. He's an Olympic champion on the track. He's hoping this year to be the first Great Britain ever to win the Tour de France. He rose to prominence for me as a Tour de France contender last year, Bob, when he dominated the Critérium du Dauphiné. He now knows he wants to start with a win in the prologue against Luke Durbridge, and look how nervous he appears to be.
Bradley Wiggins starting his professional career as a track specialist. He's transitioned over to the road, and let's see what Wiggins can do.
Well, look at this. Andy Schleck has lost himself, Bob, 28 seconds in 3.5 miles or 5.7 kilometers. I actually don't think that's too bad, because bear in mind, Bob, he lost a minute in 9 kilometers in Paris-Nice just a few months ago. I think he's on the way up.
Well, it's not horrendous, but to be honest, when you do the math, you lose 30 seconds almost in 3.5 miles, and you have a 25 to 30 mile time trial coming up later on in the week. That translates to a lot of time, maybe 2 minutes, 2.5. You cannot win any big professional cycling bike race without being able to do the time trial discipline adequately, and Andy Schleck still has a lot of work to do in the time trial.
Well, I'll leave my coat checked out for the moment on that one, Bob. I think the time trial later on in this week is going to be more of an indicator of the Tour de France, especially when you've got a few days of racing under the belt. This is Yanis Brakovic. As well as we look at Brakovic, look how he gets his knee out to get around that corner using all of the road possible. He too was a world under-23 time trialing champion.
Pretty rare for a climber. Brakovic, a very slight athlete, less than 140 pounds in total weight, but he is a solid climber, as you'd expect from a very lightweight rider. But what's unexpected about Brakovic, he can do a good ride against the clock in the time trial. That gives us the indication he might be an overall contender in the Tour de France in the years to come.
Yeah, well, Yanis Brakovic, he played around with a certain Alberto Contador when he went on to win the Critérium du Dauphiné a couple of years ago on the slopes of Alpe d'Huez.
I'm wondering if some wind gusts are not buffeting the riders now. Brakovic going from the left-hand side of the road to the right rather violently there in the time trial. You want to be as rock solid as possible and try to keep as direct a line as you can. Every time you swing to the right or left, even by a few centimeters, you lose just that much time.
But Bobby looks fast, doesn't he? He's aero, definitely. He's right, got his hands in the middle of the handlebars. When he comes to the technical part, you see they move the hands. Everybody's having difficulty with those trees on the right-hand side. And I do not know why the city of Grenoble didn't trim them back.
Did not trim the trees back on this sort of isolated bit of road here. But Yanis Brakovic back up to speed. Bradley Wiggins out on course, coming to the first U-bend.
Well, he takes it nice and carefully. He doesn't want to take any risks. I think he's a little bit over-geared there going around that corner from Bradley Wiggins, but he has, of all of the pre-Tour de France favourites, had the best start to the season. 3rd overall in the Tour of the Algarve. He won the Grand Prix Paris-Nice. He then won the Tour of Romandy with a dominating performance in the mountain individual time trial. He slimmed himself down gradually over the season. He is a man who knows how to ride a good time trial. Now, Denis Menchov, former winner of the Vuelta a España, started the season off with a 4th place in the Ruta del Sol. Not a great performance by him. It's been a violent effort, hasn't it? Over 3.5 miles of racing. 42nd time for Menchov.
Not a bad time for Denis Menchov, about 15 seconds faster than Andy Schleck. Menchov, a time trialing specialist and Grand Tour winner. He's won both the Giro and the Vuelta in his career.
You might have noticed Bradley Wiggins going the opposite way. These riders get a chance to see what the competition is like this afternoon, because they cross each other several times on this very strange and complicated course with 2 very difficult 180-degree bends. Brakovic didn't lose much speed at all there, gets himself onto those long extensions, looks down. You see how the helmet is made and trying almost to incorporate it into the body. Now coming into the finishing straight, Jurgen van den Broek. He's looking for the time of Luke Durbridge. He's not a great time trialist, but this man can hang on when it comes to the big mountain passes. But this is not a bad ride by Van den Broek, the Belgian. He's trying to challenge Durbridge. I think there's only one left in this bike race, Bob, who can build Durbridge now, and that's going to be Bradley Wiggins, as Van den Broek stops the clock in 26th place. But not a lot of time, 11 seconds.
That's a very good ride by Jurgen van den Broek. The time trial has also vexed him in years past. He's made a big improvement this spring in the time trialing discipline. That bodes well for his chances in the summer's Tour de France up to come.
Well, just look a quick look there, Bob. Again, this elliptical chainring this man has got, that was pretty much reintroduced into the main field by Bobby Julich, the American who's now a coach with Team Sky.
The idea being that you have a larger gear at the more powerful phase of the pedaling stroke. So when you come over top dead center and you engage the thigh muscle, the big quadriceps, you have a bigger gear, and then you have a little bit smaller gear on the upswing when you're using your hamstrings that don't have as much power as the big thigh muscles of these professional cyclists.
Well, Brakovic is not going to beat Luke Durbridge either this afternoon, but he's also going to put in a very solid performance. He is thinking about trying to win the Critérium du Dauphiné overall at the end of 8 days of racing. He's still in his aero position, charging up towards the finishing line. That time now of Luke Durbridge is looking very solid indeed. At 44th time, Bob, there's only one man left now who can beat Luke Durbridge out on the open road, and that's a man who's been the Olympic champion on the track, a man who's been the time trial champion of Great Britain. And wow, look at the way he's gone round that corner.
Just swinging right through there, low down on the bars there, dropping in now to his aero position. Didn't even reach for the extensions there throughout that corner, just absolutely diving into these corners, and he knows to be successful in the prologue, he has to do that, has to take chances in the corners because it's such a technical course.
Well, nice to see he's got the Paul Weller sideburns there. Paul Weller, a very well-known British guitarist. As we can see, this man is looking fast. He's looking smooth. He used every little bit of his nous to get around that corner there. Now he knows the time to beat is Luke Durbridge's 6 minutes and 38 seconds. This man looks very fast indeed.
It looks like the roads are also drying out a little bit for Bradley Wiggins. Didn't hesitate whatsoever in any of the corners so far. Bradley Wiggins, the last starter, defending champion of the Dauphiné, looks to me, for my money, to be going very well when a rider is hesitant, when he's getting buffeted by the winds. It's an indication that he's slowing down a little bit, but none of those indications for Bradley Wiggins. He is the picture of pure speed.
Well, I reckon he needs around about 6:10 if he's going to beat Durbridge around that corner, Bob. 11 and 12. He gets to the outside there. Woes around that corner, clips the inside of the apex of the corner. Now he knows the time to beat, 6:38. He's out of the saddle. He really wants this. He gets into the aero position once again. He's absolutely turning his body inside out here. Now it's going to be very close indeed. Wiggins now is looking for the time of Luke Durbridge as he comes up to the line. 6:33, 6:34. Can he do it? It's going to be cut drive whether or not he gets it on the line here because it's so close. He hasn't done it. He's got second. Bradley Wiggins has been beaten by 1.5 seconds by the 21-year-old star from Australia, Luke Durbridge.
Spectacular ride by Durbridge. Great ride. The fastest of our overall contenders, Bradley Wiggins, but not quite enough to beat Luke Durbridge's time.
What an amazing ride by the young Luke Durbridge from Orica Green Edge. A 1 second beating of Bradley Wiggins. Simon Gerrans, again from Green Edge, in 6th place. Cadel Evans, not bad. 9th place for him, looking for 6 seconds. Andre Amador of Team Movistar rounds out the top 10. Well, Luke Durbridge will be the winner. We'll take a short break. When we come back, we'll talk to the Australian rising star. As we look at the great mountains that surround Grenoble here, Grenoble in the past has seen some incredible battles, and today's battle has earned a young Australian the Road ID Ride of the Day, and today it goes to Luke Durbridge.
Well, certainly not the pre-race favorite, and the director of photography for French TV can be forgiven for the dearth of footage of this man, Durbridge, hitting the jet boosters throughout the race course. Incredible leg speed and cadence that we did see. Durbridge, a fantastic ride and the ride of the day. It could be no other. He won the time trial.
And that's our Road ID Ride of the Day. And after the finish, Luke Durbridge was very happy to talk to us about what is probably his biggest ever win.
It's maybe the most beautiful success you got since the beginning of your career, because you won 5 World Champion titles on the track and on the road, but it's maybe the most beautiful race today.
For me, it is. I'm speechless. I have no idea today. I did not expect this at all. I had good legs, and I think I was very lucky with the weather. I think the wind did pick up, and the rain was also, so that came to my advantage. But it can easily go the other way. You know, today I was very lucky with the wind, but hey, I'll take a yellow jersey at the Dauphine, and I've been working really hard towards this, and hard work pays off, and I'm so emotional right now. I don't know. We have to take a while to sink in.
You made the good choice to start early and to ride on the dry.
I definitely made the right choice. It was we predicted storms in the afternoon, and so I decided to go off early, and the director said we go early, and I mean it's not a very nice wait because you have to wait for so long to find out if you win or not, but I'm very, very happy I went early, because if I had gone later it might not have happened.
And today, Bradley Wiggins for 1 second, it's huge.
Like I said, it's to beat these guys that I've always looked up to, and I mean, Bradley Wiggins is such a class bike rider, and I know he's in very good form, and also Tony Martin as well, and my goal was to maybe top 5 today, and I did not come here to get a result. I come here to just do the best I could, and if the best I could is a win on the day, then that was good.
How long do you think you can keep this yellow jersey?
My plan is not come here to ride GC at the Dauphiné. I had two objectives coming in here. One was today, and one was the 4th stage, which is the long time trial. It's the longest time trial I've ever done, but I really want to focus towards that. So if I hold the yellow jersey tomorrow, then that would be fantastic. But my objective is not to come here to hold the yellow jersey or ride GC. Is today and stage 4.
I've got to say that's a very nice present for the brand new Australian team on the block, Orica Green Edge, and at 21 years of age, Bob, that man's a star already.
Well, when you beat your idols, you have done something special. So Luke Durbridge will have a great little start to his career there with a win here in the Prologue.
Well, he will. It's going to be a difficult one to defend, though, because he goes into tomorrow's stage with a 1 second advantage over Bradley Wiggins, 3 seconds over Andre Grivko, and 3 seconds over Carlos Barredo. Tony Martin won't be too upset with 5th place, and I don't think Cadell Evans will be too disappointed with 9th place, looking for 6 seconds. Some of the notable, Bob, a little bit further down.
18th place in the standings so far. David Miller, a decent ride. TJ Van Garderen, George Hincapie, and Danny Pate, the Americans, 31st, 46th, and 54th. Andy Schleck, 30 seconds down, almost in 102nd place.
Well, this man no stranger to yellow jerseys, because in the month of April he was the winner of the Circuit of the South, a race that Lance Armstrong won many years ago, and that because of his time trialing ability.
Orica, a new team and a great successful season so far. They started out the year with none other than Milano Sanremo, won by Simon Gerrans, who, by the way, had a very good prologue to start the proceedings in the Dauphiné. But that man will start the open road stage tomorrow as your first race leader of this year's Dauphiné.
Well, I'll tell you one thing, you won't be seeing him at the Tour de France this year, because he will be concentrating on representing Australia on the track at the Olympic Games in London 1 week after the Tour de France. But for the moment, Luke Durbridge's mind is at the Critérium du Dauphiné. That's where his head is, and you can follow it all on the Epic Cycle Series tomorrow, presented by Michelob Ultra, as we continue with stage 1 of the Criterium du Dauphiné, 4 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on the NBC Sports Network. And don't forget, coverage of Game 3 of the Stanley Cup Final begins tomorrow at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And if you want to get a full schedule of our coverage, log on to NBCSports.com. Until tomorrow, on behalf of Bob Roll, I'm Paul Sherwin saying goodbye.